Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along. Yeah, just letting everyone in at the moment. So everyone's just slowly piling through the door as we speak. So we'll just give them a couple of minutes. Thanks for getting here on time and coming along today. I hope you're all feeling like you've got that Friday feeling. I don't know, or whether you're
Really?
feeling Friday frazzled. I don't know. I don't know what sort of week you've been having. Um, but yes, and maybe while we're just letting people in, maybe if you just let us know in the chat, maybe give us an emoji to let us know whether you've got the Friday feeling, whether you've got the frazzled free feeling. Just stick us a little emoji in the chat to let us know how you're feeling today. So yeah, we still just got people coming in. We'll just give it another minute or so before we make a start. Hello
I'm
to
just
everyone that's
sending.
just joining us.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Oh, Pete's feeling very good by the look of it, by that and look of that emoji. So, Philip, maybe not so much, but
Shocked. Shocked. What were you expecting from the two Jameses? Why?
all right. Well, it's certainly a mixed bag. I'll give you that. Sorry, if you're just joining us, hello everyone. If you've got a chance to share an emoji in the chat, let us know how you're feeling today. People are just sharing a little emoji feeling. I think it's generally pretty positive. Martin's obviously had a week of it by the look of things. So right, I think right. There's still a few more people coming in, but we will definitely make a start. Yeah, so we don't keep you hanging on for too long. But look, yeah, thank you everyone for choosing to spend some of your Friday lunchtime with us. Hopefully, we will make that worthwhile for you. I hope you've had a good week. As I say, Um, the emojis seem to be suggesting that it's been a bit of a mixed bag, but look, hopefully we can kind of bring the week to a decent end. And it's just, yeah, lovely to have so many of you along. Always a relief not to be talking to yourself in these situations. So, yeah, just really appreciate everyone signing up and coming along. So, hopefully, yeah, you'll find the next hour or so interesting as we explore a subject that's become a bit of a growing trend, particularly on social. And that's law, which is a different flavour of storytelling for us all to delve into and to find a bit more about. And we are very lucky to have an A-list guest with us today to talk about law and storytelling. And I'll introduce him in just a second. Just a couple of bits of admin, just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with you afterwards. We can share it with anyone else who's not able to make it today. And what we'll do in terms of questions, we'll give you the lowdown on on law and let our guest also do his bit. If you've got questions as you go along, feel free to hold on to them to the end or stick them in the chat. And we will deal with all of the questions at the end as we go along. So yeah, hopefully that's all right. As I say, stick them in the chat and keep letting us know kind of with your emojis how you're feeling about things. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming along today. So yeah, I'll just introduce who I am and then introduce you to our speaker today. If we've not met before, then hello, I'm James number one today. There is a James number one and a James number two. And I run a communications consultancy called Turn the Page. And Turn the Page is there to help teams and organizations tell better stories and use them to increase the impact of their communications. So, whether that's through brand or organizational storytelling, using them to elevate campaigns and content, or through workshops, training, things like this. It's all about harnessing the unique power of stories and storytelling. So, my story is stories really. I started off in the heady world of local journalism as a reporter. Then moved into PR and comms, working in house in the fire service and local authorities. And then spent 5 years working at a brilliant creative agency called Alive, where storytelling just ran through everything we did. So yeah, I set up Turn the Page about 18 months ago to put all of that storytelling experience hopefully to good use. So that is me, but I will now introduce our headline act for the day. And yes, it is another James. Yes, you're getting two Jameses for the price of one today. You cannot argue with that for value. James, hello, how you doing?
Hello, I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
it's been a long week of Biebercella and all this good stuff. Still rinsing the pothole stuff, but yeah, it's been good. Just kind of in pre-election period at the moment, obviously. So yeah, a different change of pace from usual, but kind of nice to just be a bit more creative as well. So yeah, all good.
Oh, that's good. I'm sure there's a few people on the call who can appreciate that
Yeah.
pre-election period as well. Yeah, and that bit of space it gives you. So, if you don't know about James, there's a little bit about him on the screen there. So he's a social media manager at Ealing Council in London, and they're fast developing like a real reputation for the brilliant content that they've been developing at Ealing. And James's work in particular on TikTok and on Insta has really been sort of transforming the council's content and how it's seen and how it's shared, particularly by younger audiences. And actually, all that really good work won him the prestigious Best Young Communicator award at the Comms 2.0 Awards in December, which is kind of like the public sector comms Oscars. So well done on that one, James. Any other awards we should be aware of, or any other
Uh, uh,
accolades?
Losing count. There's probably a few. There's probably a few. No, I'm joking. There is just the one for now. But yeah,
No
that's the only
swimming
awards.
badges or anything like that?
I've got a few of my meter badges. Yeah, they're actually on the wall over
Okay.
there, but I won't spin round. But yeah, so social media manager for Ealing, and really, if you haven't seen the stuff, definitely take a look. But just really changing the way that councils are seen in a good way, which comes with some challenges for sure, which I'm sure a lot of you have wherever you're working. But yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. So we'll be hearing from James like very shortly in terms of what's going on at Ealing and all the great stuff they've been doing. And as I say, if you've got any questions that spring up when we're talking, do stick them in the chat. Or if there's things you'd like to share, we're always interested in hearing people's views and kind of what your experiences are. So yeah, do stick all of that in the chat. And as I say, we'll wrap up as much as we can at the end. So before we hear from James B, I just want to talk a bit about law. What the hell is it? And what are some of the ways that we might be able to harness it? And more importantly, why? Why could it be really useful for our organisations? So I'm going to start appropriately enough, I suppose, with a quick story. So I sat down on the morning of February the 17th, which was a fairly grey, rainy day, as most of them were at the start of this year. I could hear the rain pitter-pattering on the window. And I was sort of started my shuffling through my morning admin with a cup of tea in hand and checking my emails. And the first social media I usually check is LinkedIn, which is a bit tragic, I know, but sadly, running your own business, being a bit of a LinkedIn wanker is unfortunately part of the deal with that. So I saw a message and I popped it open, and it was from the very lovely Helena, who some of you might know. She used to be a council head of comms, but is now working for Orlo, the social media management software gurus. And she'd shared me a post and said, I'd love to know what you think of this. So I opened it, and what you can see on the screen is what I was confronted with. So as you might imagine, for someone whose livelihood revolves around storytelling, my initial reaction was to wince and then start Googling alternative careers. I've always fancied being a dentist for some reason, so that seemed like a viable option at that point. But actually, as I read through the post and as I read through the article that she'd shared, I started to nod along. And actually, by the end of it, I was actually sort of punching the air in agreement because it captured so many of the things that I quite often bang on about when I'm talking about storytelling, doing sessions on storytelling as well. So I think it's probably worth saying at this point that I don't think storytelling is dead. It is still a massive part of what we do. But as with everything we do, things evolve and things change. So let's explore a little bit about what law actually looks like. And so, as you do with these things, I sought out a dictionary definition of law, and I discovered that law is the space between the eye and the bill of a bird or the corresponding region of a reptile or fish. And it was at this point that I realized that law maybe has two meanings. So then I found this meaning, which felt far closer to the mark. And I thought actually this was just really useful in helping us to break down what law is and how it might potentially be able to help us. So that body of knowledge and traditions part, that first part, body of traditions or knowledge on a subject held by a group. I think that's what really, that's us, isn't it? That's what we know. It's what shapes our organizations. It's our identity. And the traditions part, that's our culture, our history. And then that second part, typically passed on from person to person by word of mouth. You know, it's how we're looking, it's how we're building the perception of our organization, our reputation, our brand, and ultimately building trust as well, which we'll come back to. So knowing what our organizations are, and what our organizations are all about, but then how other people are viewing us and how other people are talking about us, that's the fundamentals of law. So if we're subscribing to law as the new storytelling, and hey, that's why we're here, so we might as well go with it. So what is the difference? What's the difference between stories and law? So stories are what we're telling people. We craft them, we deliver them, but generally they have an ending. And as I say, I don't want anyone to come away from here thinking that stories aren't important, because they absolutely are. They connect us with people, and they bring emotion and substance to subjects, often that we're trying to bring exactly those things to, quite dry subjects. But if stories are what we tell people, then law is what they tell each other. And we come back to that definition that we've just looked at, that passing on by word of mouth. And so it's the world that is formed, an impression that is formed by everything that we're putting out. It's our vibe, our personality. It should be us being us, like no filters, and authentic, immersing people in our world and helping to build that emotional connection. If people landed on your social accounts or landed on your pages today, what would they get your world? Would they understand your world instantly? And how does that look? Well, law can come through, I think, in so many different ways. And there's just a few examples on the screen there. I think it can come through in the energy that you give off, and I think there's what we'll hear from James number 2 in a minute. I think is a really good example of that energy that we give over. um the rapid rise of Duolingo is due in large part to its mascot, and the legend that's been built around the owl. When people talk about Duolingo, they talk about the owl, or they tell you how long their latest streak is. Of course, that's the other part to it. But if you ever went to Duolingo's offices, I think you would expect it to be inhabited by green owls. It's that consistent weirdness, that has created their world and creates that world. Taylor always comes up, when I'm talking about storytelling, because she's such a brilliant storyteller. But the world that she has built through her songs and everything that she shares, is what creates like her fanatical Swifties. They just can't get enough. It's an ongoing tapestry of her life that people just want to keep delving back into. Um, and our language as well. Our language is part of our law as well. Charlie XCX managed to create law with just one word a couple of years ago. When Brat Summer was going on, that created a whole world, a whole vibe, a whole movement, which people just wanted to be a part of, and they instantly understood. Um, so if we understand what law is, well, why should we think about using it in our organizations or building it for our organizations, and what does it actually look like? So just thinking about where storytelling can really help us in comms. And yeah, so storytelling itself isn't completely dead. Well, there's always 4 areas that I highlight in terms of where storytelling can support us in terms of our comms and our organizations. um, the human face, so giving a face to our policies, our priorities, our projects, putting the human face to what we say and what we do. Connecting with our community, so celebrating the real people in our communities, our customers, our patients, the people we work with. Those day-to-day heroes, if you like, celebrating with them or sometimes commiserating with them, but being a part of that community and celebrating those people, seeing the impact. So, the evidence of the difference that we're making or that we're trying to make, the real world impact. It's one thing to say it, but it's definitely another thing to show it, that, it's the so what for people. But the last one, which obviously where we are today, our legend and lore. And I think it's just as important as all those others as well. It's us showing who we are, our ethos, our identity, our culture. And I just think that's really important in terms of us building that real connection with people and building trust and hopefully coming across as authentic. So what are some of the elements then that we can learn from others that we can use in our content and our comms and help us to build lore? So I think certainly our people are probably the biggest factor, or one of the biggest factors. They are the characters in our world and in our story, particularly their energy, their personalities, their names. As soon as we're using names, people kind of get that connection with people. So I think it's about letting people be themselves, letting them be them, and our staff are the people who are displaying our culture firsthand, whether that's firefighters, nurses, maintenance people, that is where our culture and our personality lives. There's the places and our purpose as well. So, showing people the places, letting them in to our world, whether that's physical spaces, or outdoor spaces, giving them a sense of place of what our world actually looks and feels like. What's the film set, I suppose, for our world, and showing them what it is that's driving our purpose, showing them what it is that's really kind of driving us as an organization. The quirks and culture, I think, are a really important part of it. The things that are unique to us and to our organizations. And it might be that actually we think they're really boring, but actually leaning into them, I think, is really important for sort of building this lore and building this authenticity and trust with people. And in fact, actually, if you've got an interesting fact about your organization or your area that you don't think any of us will know, then please feel free to share them in the chat, because who doesn't love a bit of random pub trivia? So yeah, share those interesting facts about your area or about your organization. We'd love to see those. And one of my favorite bits of content that I've seen in the last few months was a post from Gwent Police, who just made an Instagram post about the hats that people wear in the police force, all the different types of hats, helmets, the usual PC hats that we see. There was 8 or 9 different types of hat, but they were just embracing their culture, embracing their quirks. So yeah, share your weirdness, share your in-jokes, even your mistakes as well, because I think that's what helps to build authenticity and trust. And then our history and our traditions. So a big part of our lore is our backstory. What made us the organization that we are today, our traditions. And again, it might seem quite archaic, some of that stuff, but if we can explain it in an interesting way and share it in an interesting way, it helps to build that world, and it helps to give people, a sense of who we are. I suppose uniform services, the police and fire, army, people like that, obviously they're very big on kind of traditions and pageantry, that type of stuff. But again, I think explaining and embracing this stuff, it lets people into our world and it explains our world to them. And here's the really, really good news. So what's really interesting about some of those elements that we've just shared there, some of those lore building elements and building blocks, is that there is also a data-driven case for them as well, in terms of using them and sort of basing our approaches on them. So I've just completed a social media review for a fire and rescue service, working with the guy whose name you can see down on the bottom of the screen there, a really brilliant guy called Alex Waddington, who is a sort of data analyst who crunches data to help inform and improve comms outcomes. And so through this review that I've been doing with Alex and others as well that he's been working on, we find it is exactly this type of authentic content, law building content, if you like, that performs the highest. So one of the best examples of that is something Alex calls everyday heroes. These, the real people that we just mentioned, the real people, whether that's our staff, the people in our communities, their personalities, letting their personalities and letting their achievements shine. So content like that, but also behind the scenes stuff as well. We always see behind the scenes stuff, surprising stuff, stuff that surprises people, like those quirks that we were just talking about. Really high performing content, local pride, again, part of our history, part of our culture, local pride type content as well. So all those types of content that we've just talked about that help to drive our law also is seen as the highest performing content from thousands of pieces of content that have been analyzed as well. So there is a data driven case as well for building these worlds, building this law, and using that type of storytelling. So the one final thing I'm just going to mention before I hand over to James number 2 is authenticity, which is a word I've already used quite a few times, and I think this is where we just need to be a little bit careful about, like, when we're talking about our law and how we build it, because I think authentic has become a bit of a commodity in its own right, something we can just sort of switch on and off when the time is right. And if you hadn't clocked him, that is a picture of Brooklyn Beckham right there. And one of the things that came out of that rift he was having, or has had, with his family a few months ago, his very famous parents, was the sort of over earnest nature. Some people were critical of the over earnest nature of some of those public statements, almost sounding like they were trying too hard to sound genuine and sound regretful. And I think that when authenticity starts to feel performative, that is when trust starts to erode. So, people can smell inauthenticity a mile off these days, but I think particularly on social as well. And so while authentic human comms, it is more important than ever, particularly in the sort of rising tide of AI driven content, it's about making sure we build trust and not erode it. So authenticity, I think, is something we just need to I think there's quite a sort of narrow tightrope to walk on that, and it's just something to be aware of. But I think that's what makes what you're about to hear really, really interesting, and what James number 2 and what Ealing are doing really interesting, because I think they're using their borough and its story to build their law. So I'm going to let James tell you how they've been doing that.
Nice one. Thank you, James. That's really, really good. Let me just get up my stuff, which should take 10 to 15 minutes, so bear with us, and then you can ask away. If you want to put questions into the Q&A bit as we're going through, you can do. I probably look at them at the end just to not ruin the flow, but yeah, just add any burning questions in there. James, just to check, is this all good in terms of, can you see
you're fine, mate. You're flying. Yeah,
awesome. So I don't always turn up to the office with a bin. Depends on the day. Thursdays, sometimes recycling bin, sometimes a black bin. I've never gotten into a food caddy though. So I'm social media manager at Ealing. So I started at Ealing in, I think, December 2023. So I've been there quite a while. Getting up to sort of 2.5 years now. And I started as videographer, and I was brought in basically to create the content that a lot of councils are still making for various reasons. So the fairly corporate, traditional content, it might be interviews with members of the public, the leader, that sort of thing. But I soon realized, as I got in there and could see it for myself, that wasn't quite what was going to work and actually connect with residents, which is the number one kind of point of my role and us as a team. And yeah, we didn't start TikTok until last summer, so it's quite a new thing. I'm not going to pretend we've been doing it for the full 2.5 years. It was definitely a gradual process. There's a lot of people to convince. But yeah, so I was from a PR agency, then did a bit of music industry stuff, which is quite fun and creative, and then came to local government for the challenge of making the council, basically making the council look good and, inverted commas, cool, which you can judge whether I've done that or not, and I won't cry about it. So next 15 minutes, our law is very much our influencer era, as we've called it, which isn't a term we came up with, that fully existed before in a different way, but we've kind of jumped on that. Working with leadership is quite an important thing and one of the questions I'd say on stuff like this, I get asked all the time, and it is a tricky one. And then why bother, which I'll tell you. And this here at the bottom is just last April to end of March. And this is kind of the Ealing tidal wave, which is what leadership have been calling it. And you'll see, look, the effect once we started TikTok just rising, and all channels pretty much at different rates were growing in terms of impressions. There is a dip in March, and the reason for that is that this peak was so unbelievably high. Nothing I could have ever guessed. I'm going to show you our potholes video shortly. And the morning I posted that video, I messaged my colleague and I said, I don't have a great feeling about this, but let's post it anyway. And that's the one that is probably half the reason I'm on this call anyway. So there you go. That's the Ealing tidal wave. So here's some of the big numbers. One of the key ones for me is the more followers, because that shows we're building an active audience and the law is working. That's really, really important. Also engaging with younger audiences. I'm also looking at how many of how many are actually local. It's a question I get a lot. Is it just the big number? We're actually connecting with a lot of local residents through our channels, which should really be the aim. The wider stuff's great reputationally, but really I'm trying to connect with a specific audience, which is residents of our borough. And we've had the fly tipping campaign, which a lot of you will have seen, in a very kind of police crime style. That's been working quite well. And also I'll mention later, but positivity has really, really increased. So what's in it for you guys? So this is my favorite Taylor Swift album, Reputation. And I would say that is the number one thing, or the number one point. Once it works, and once you're telling those stories and you're creating a law like Duolingo, like Ryanair, all these other channels and us, it's recognizable. And if done well, then yeah, I have a large feeling that, yeah, the reputation will improve of wherever you're working, whether that's council, police, fire services, etc. The reputation should improve, and also your reputation as the person behind it or the people behind it. If you're a team of sort of 3 or 4 or more, and your comms team is brilliant. And one amazing thing we've had was the leader, and that's what I'll come on to in a bit, was at a reception in number 10 with other council leaders, and he really was the talk of the town. And they were all coming up to him and going, I've seen your videos, with their phones, what are you doing? Why are you doing all this content? And so that, for me, having our leader mentioned in number 10 just shows the power that this can have, not just for blowing up and going viral, but actually within those stakeholder groups is really, really useful. And then one thing that's not listed on here, we've actually had media coverage from social media. So traditionally you'll get your media coverage by pitching to journalists as part of your press team, or if you do that as a kind of general comms officer thing. But actually we've had BBC London, which is really, really cool, Daily Mail, which was actually positive, I know, believe it or not, off the back of the fly tipping campaign. And that was all because of the content reaching so many people that eventually got to some of the journalists. So it's really, really, really cool. And the number one thing here is there is no better feeling, trust me, that's why I do it, than when a bit of content actually works. When you reach that target audience, when you get over whatever your normal views are looking like or your normal likes, it really is the best feeling. And that's kind of why I keep doing it, because I'm just looking for that's my next hit. It's the 1 million views or it's the 200,000 views, but we know it was mostly people in the borough. That's kind of the great thing I strive towards. So what's with the Ealing law? James, what are you doing? This is absolutely mental. Why have you done this? Another question that I can try and answer later is, how have you been allowed to do this? Is one I get a lot from especially local government. The Ealing law it's bins. It's Craig David, for no reason, by the way. Absolutely, there is no link at all, besides we did fill me in, obviously, for potholes. But it's silly music choices, it's bins, it's transitions, it's all this fun stuff, it's emojis, but it's taking serious council priorities, and it's always something council related, and just making it engaging for audiences. That's how we've done it. But our law is very visual. It's surprising for a council, which is why it works. And it's repeatable. So I can repeat bins messaging once a week, and it might eventually get old and we'll have to find something new, but it's recognizable, and people come to our page and they know what the law we've created or the brand we've created is, and it's instantly recognizable. So much so that we've had people, especially on our videos with our leader, which is really interesting, and I wouldn't have expected that in the past. People are saying, I love this series. Now, it is kind of a series, but it wasn't really the intention. We've just been making a similar sort of style. But the fact people recognize it as that shows that we have actually built this brand and people recognize it. And once you have got this brand and people are recognizing it, double down and keep going. And that doesn't mean just make content about bins. As much as I'd love to, my boss wouldn't like it very much. And so I'd probably be pulled back across other things like parks, potholes, crime, all this sort of stuff. But yeah, this here is in 4 screenshots, the Ealing law. And it is, I would say, quite recognizable. And interestingly, what it also is not corporate. And it, dare I say it, not to undermine myself, doesn't look very professional. But that's exactly why it works. It's raw, it's authentic, and it's what people expect to see on social media anyway in their day-to-day scrolling. They don't expect or don't want to see something corporate overdone. That's when they switch off. It feels like an ad. So that's really important. So I will play this video and hopefully the sound works. You might have seen it already, but I'll play it anyway. James, if sound doesn't work, give me a bell. Okay, nice. Hopefully that worked for everyone. Yeah, that was the video that it wasn't the turning point because we had that before where we were allowed to make this kind of content, but this is where it all kind of went a bit, okay, this is really working, which is really, really good, especially on Instagram. And it's my favorite example. Your version of law or whatever you create or whatever the direction you take your brand or organization or council in, it doesn't have to be like this. This isn't the point of what me and James are talking about today. It doesn't have to be really silly. It might just be lighthearted, and that's fine. It might be more storytelling and emotive, which also works, but you will find what that is for you. And obviously every place is different, organization, area, borough. But this is the way we did it. But the important thing is there's a clear message in here, which is that we're filling potholes, we're filling this many a day, and we're cracking on with it. And we're telling everyone and we're having fun with it. Now, the comments was obviously super mixed. What was really interesting was that this was the most positive reception we've ever had to a post ever. And yet this reached the most people. So this reached, I think it's probably on 2.5 million impressions now, just on Instagram, let alone other platforms. And it was really positive. But people weren't being positive in saying, or some were saying, well done for filling the potholes. But it was mainly, I love this approach. It was mainly, this is so refreshing that my council is willing to tell a story in this way. And that's why it reached all these people, because that's how they normally receive content. They don't receive content in the tried and corporate and traditional way. And so that was really interesting. And I think we found in the end that, including likes and then a sample of sort of 100 comments, I think we did, the negativity, the kind of net negativity was actually less than 1% when taking into account the likes. Now, most people, if you're that angry and you're that type of person, you will comment. If you're really happy and you love this video, you probably will hit like at the most. It's unlikely, at least I don't, ever comment. And so that's another thing to take into account. But it was really, really, really good in terms of positivity. But it doesn't have to be this style is a really key thing to take away. I have selected these 3 comments because I like them. There are obviously loads of negative ones I could have shown you. But the point here is you can get some of these positive stuff. It's really, really important to have that. And then one question that's just come into the chat that I don't know if I fully touch on later, so I'll quickly answer it while I'm here. In terms of what stats I measure, generally speaking, there's a lot, if I'm honest, but the ones I report back to leadership, impressions are just a really good indicator that the content's working in terms of reach, in terms of number of people. Likes versus kind of negative comments I really like to look into, so sentiment, and that's really good for SLT as well. They generally really like hearing how many people are liking the content. And another one is, and this is a lot harder to measure in terms of, I mean, you've got engagement rate, which is really useful, but in terms of whether the people are actually local, that is hard to measure, and you can do in some social media management software in terms of followers, and you can read through comments, but just knowing like out of, let's say, take 50 comments, how many were actually local, kind of mentioning, no way, this is my council, or love this page, I'm so proud of living here, that kind of thing. How many of them are relevant to being local? That should be one of your main indicators, and that's one I use. And listening to the comments is key too. So your law you might have ideas already. You might be saying, well, we have loads of good history here, wherever you are, or James, you were saying earlier about hats, for example, as an example of kind of finding that law with that. That's super interesting, and yours might be different. But listen to your comments, because when one of your posts does do well, there's pretty high chances that that you're going to be able to find something in those. There's someone's going to be saying something interesting that you'll be able to kind of latch onto. And it might be someone might mention buses if you're in an area with really famous buses. I don't know. We are in Ealing, for example. Everyone seems to go mental for Ealing buses. So we made a post. So listen in, hear what people are saying, be active in the community and find out what people enjoy and tap into that. And that doesn't mean just posting about that, but it means you bring people in through that. So for us, Bins and Craig David. And then when we hit the other stuff and when we do post about the other priorities, we've already got the audience. That's the point. You build the audience and then you can hit them with the realistically a little bit more boring stuff, but you don't hit them with the boring stuff as the kind of hook or the main thing. So in terms of our Binfluencer era, this is genuinely just a really silly term. I think originally used as kind of when you're the first person on the street to put your bins out nice and tidy and for first to put them away, you'd become the Binfluencer because you were the first one to do it. We just use this as a silly term to kind of engage with people. And I chose this as our main focus for building this law, building this brand. Why does it work? Well, straight away, it's council related. It's ordinary, it's everyday, and I dare say it's funny in terms of the way we've done it. And that then brings in that active audience. And then we'll hit them with the fly tipping stuff, parks, potholes, even elections, all this stuff. But we've now got that audience that we can give that stuff to, and they'll be more receptive, whereas they wouldn't have before because they had no reason to kind of come in the first place to follow us or engage with us. If people want to quickly type in the chat just any of your favorite social accounts you've seen. NHS was mentioned earlier, but if people just ping a few in, it'd just be interesting to see. It doesn't have to be public sector, but just ping a few in and it'd be cool to see who people love. RSPB is a very good example. Very, very good. They do stuff in a very fun way. It's similar actually in terms of like a lot of the explosions and things like that. Someone's seen the Argos and Curry's beef, so that's funny. They've been arguing, and I have a large feeling that they're both managed by the same social media agency. And I have a large feeling that's why they're doing it in a very clever way. Very, very clever way. Interesting, good for a while, but maybe it wore off. Maybe someone left. That's interesting. Nice. Britta, whoever said that is, I saw that recently and it is hilarious. It's so silly. Like I thought I'd taken things as far as I could go. I was wrong. Awesome. That's really cool. And someone above just mentioned about resident perception. We are having a survey soon, I think. So that would be good. Service outcomes, less of a thing for my area. We do paid social as well. And that's where kind of overall service outcomes do actually come into it a lot more, because it'll be click on this link or sign up to this service. What I'm doing in terms of organic social is very much reputation, building an audience primarily. But in terms of fly tipping, we've had some really good results in terms of reducing it as well. Nice. We're nearly there, guys. We are nearly there, and then you can fire away any burning questions and ask me why on earth I've done half of this stuff in any more detail. So working with leadership, this is something that comes up an awful lot. So if it loads, James, there we go. So be clear about your objectives with leadership. Now that might be one person, it might be a few, if it's senior leadership. In my case, there are a lot of people to talk to, and I do try and get my nose into those big meetings and kind of influence a little bit. And I think being there in the office and actually explaining it to them, it seems to make a lot more sense. Whereas just sending them another PowerPoint with impressions, likes, they've got, SLT are receiving so many of those per week, let alone quarter, that it's really good to be able to just get in that room and explain things, not in a, oversimplified way, but show them some numbers and explain why. And feel free, show them Ealing, show them the NHS, show them the Met Police, whoever else it is that you admire, maybe even some private sector, places. And that should help kind of buy them, get them in a bit more. But be clear about your objectives. What are you trying to do? So is it a service outcome, for example, which it might be, sign up to this service, vote in the upcoming election for us. That's an outcome that we're kind of targeting at the moment. We're trying to do, or register to vote. It might be reducing fly tipping. But if the objective is we want to build a captive audience in the borough, we want more residents to follow us, then be clear about that. Tell them that's the point. And then they won't say, well, why are they not being directed to this website? And I think that is a big thing, is that social is becoming less go here, more look at this, there and then. And social platforms don't really love when you take people away too much, because that's kind of going against what the point is, which is to doom scroll. As depressing as that is, I know that's really dystopian, but that's the truth. Build the relationship. So I just mentioned there, and someone said in the chat about being in the room. For me, that's really what's worked. So building that relationship with the leader directly, and even before you can get the buy-in from the leader. I was just a videographer when I started, and I didn't have much influence when I first came in at all. So I convinced my comms manager, and then the head of comms, and then you get into that room with the leader, and then he trusts you, or they trust you. But building that relationship's really, really important, and it's just not going to work without it. Show them the results, like I said a minute ago, and tailor your approach to each platform. And also don't just, and I'm not saying this so you don't just copy my stuff, but it probably won't work. So what you'll find is, and I have seen a few copycats already, which is fine, because I definitely take inspiration from elsewhere too. But what they fail to do is tailor the approach. So have a look at what someone else is doing, and how can you do that for wherever it is you are, or whatever it is you're doing. Definitely tailor it. But yeah, bonus points in the show them the results thing. If you're showing people Ealing, that's more than fine with me. So the point here, going back to law, the point is that, I mean, it's working for us, but it's having the leader telling the story, so the history of the borough, and I'll show you this video now. That is the law. Now, the history of the borough on its own is interesting to some people, but if it's just a graphic or a news story, for me personally, I probably wouldn't pay attention. But having the leader tell it in this really interesting way and well presented works, or has been for us. So I'll play this quick video, and this is about conservation areas, which are kind of places that are, historically protected in terms of what you can do to them. Cool. So that's kind of the series that one of our commenters talked about. And for a start, and I will explain the law stuff in a minute, but from a technical point of view, that is 25 seconds long, something like that. It's using a council leader, which generally I actually do cut straight away from, because it can kind of put some people off. It wasn't unscripted. That was a fully scripted video from me, and I basically gave it to him and said, this is the video you're speaking about. And there were some very, very minor changes, but that's taken a long time. If you'd asked me that a year ago, every script was ripped apart and every script was changed. But that was because we had an educated leadership in terms of the why behind why this style of content. The beauty here is that we're still telling a story. We're still building law. We're still telling a story. The story is that with this one, it's mainly history related, but we are protecting these areas, and we've just done a review to make sure that they're all up to date and we're happy and there's no changes needed. That's the council message. But what you'll notice on this next slide is, if you look at the key at the bottom, is that has been sandwiched. And this is really, really important. It's one of my top tips that I give people, is don't put your council message, and this might sound so silly, and this is a hard one to pitch to senior people, don't put your council message at the start. If you start with, he's Peter Mason, leader of Ealing Council, and I'm here today to talk to you about conservation areas. I mean, I was probably lost as your average scroller that doesn't really know who the leader of that council is. I was lost at I'm Peter, because I'm thinking, well, and that's not relevant to me. I don't need to know who you are. What are you saying? Why would it interest me? So instead, you start with a question and you answer it at the end. And that sandwich means that you should, and it worked for us, is get a bit more viewer retention, which is a harder one to say than I thought. So you start with this question, you pique their interest, you don't make the video too long, and then hopefully by the end, they're wanting to hear the answer. Now, there isn't anything really to stop them skipping and finding out. That's the nature of it, but they'd still be engaging with the post. The background here in yellow, and the council message is actually quite short. Now, for me, that is honestly maybe even a bit too long. And if I look back at the stats, I might find that it was actually a bit too much. However, it is a council video. But the point here is, have that council message sandwiched. Generally don't start with it. Sometimes it works. Like potholes, we literally started with, why doesn't the council fill potholes? Very different style. But when you're working with leadership, You've got to do presenter-led content because that's what they want. This is a really, really good way to do it, and it's worked for me. And this is one of the comments we had from someone saying that they loved the series. I'm just going to look at that because it says something useful. Was your leader captioned? No. So this is the thing. I'm guessing you mean in terms of name tag or lower third. No, we did used to, but what we realized was the more you put leader of the council, the name, the more likely people are to switch off. So we definitely do use him in that way. And then one other question, I know we're doing questions at the end, but it's too tempting not to answer. And I get this all the time. How can we feature the leader without including everyone else? So the way we did this was proof and evidence. So basically, if we have, every single cabinet member, there's no recognition. There's no law being built because there's about 50 different pieces of law, or there's all these different things. There's the history, but then you've got a different presenter each week. Having one really helps, and we found that when we did have one and we built that one up, the stats were even better in terms of engagement, and the message was getting across. It does also help that the leader of the council can tell the rest of his cabinet, because it's one party. He can say, sorry, but I'm the one in the vids and you're not. That does help. But I went to a few of the cabinet meetings and just kind of said, look, this is what's going to work. Please bear with us. Let us try it. And fortunately, it has worked a lot better that we've got one, pretty much one, instead of 5 different presenters. 5 different presenters is super messy and generally doesn't work. It's a tricky conversation, but if you can explain it to the leader and get them, then yeah. And in terms of charisma, we can talk about this in a minute. If your leader really doesn't have any charisma, genuinely try to not put them in as much content as possible. I would say 1 in 10 videos has our leader in it, generally speaking. 1 in 10. Maybe during certain campaigns a little bit more, but it really shouldn't be the main thing of your content. Most of your content should just feel much more raw and authentic. And here's a bit of a rule book, and it comes on to what I was saying that you can look into. But this is just useful afterwards. But the main thing here is history is free law, which is super interesting. You can just take it. You can just make something from it. You'll notice that with movies all the time. They're making stuff about stuff that happened so long ago and keeps coming up. It's endless. There is literally kind of free, endless IP and law. So tap into it to tell a different story, whether that's culture or history. And that is me done. And then James, we can do as many questions as we can, I guess.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. God, I mean, there is so much
That's
in
a
there,
lot.
and I think, but it's such good stuff, and obviously the number of questions and comments that have already been coming through and that you've been dealing with as you go, very impressive, mate. Being able to deal with the questions while you present, that's
I struggled.
Well,
I'll admit.
well practiced. I mean, I don't want to talk for too long. But I think, particularly in relation to the, you just talking about your leader content there and the storytelling that you've been doing with him. I think that was the stuff that sort of first caught my eye, and when it first sort of popped up on my timeline, and there was just this guy. I think it was the one initially about the Rolling Stones, the music clubs that they played in Ealing. It just popped up on my timeline, and we sort of talked about authenticity earlier, and this guy was just asking questions and saying, do you know where this is, telling the story about where the Rolling Stones played their first gig, and I just assumed it was like a proper presenter, maybe a member of the comms team or a local historian, because it just felt really natural, really authentic, but obviously telling a really interesting story that told you about the borough and told you about its history as well.
That's it.
So I think that meeting of kind of, the leader, but meeting the law and then kind of what that created, as you described. Yeah, I just think it's brilliant. But as you say, maybe only 1 in 10 of your videos is that. And the other stuff you're doing, you're showing your people, your borough, you're sharing the place, you're sharing the history, you're sharing, it's a real mix of that stuff that we sort of talked about. Obviously the quirks of the culture, the binfluencer stuff, really leading into the bin stuff as well. So much there. Should we get into some questions?
There's a few in the main chat I can probably quickly fire through, actually. So there's one here about how do you tailor content, or do you tailor content? I fully agree with that statement. So focusing on one platform and doing it well, it's better than doing 5 or 6. I do currently do probably 5 or 6, but only 1 or 2 of them are done properly, if I'm honest. So I fully agree with that. focus on a few at a time, nail them. But you might still want to keep the others going, in terms of if there's a bit of a demand for it. Things like LinkedIn as well, it's still important to keep up. But we tailor every single piece of content. So potholes is my favorite example, and I don't have the Facebook version to hand. But to quickly describe it, the Facebook version was a static image, and it had before and after the pothole being filled, basically static image, and that got over, from memory, 150,000 impressions. Because I knew that's what would work better on Facebook. How did I know that? By looking at loads of our previous Facebook posts and kind of reading the trends and realizing that static posts like that or graphics generally for that topic work better. Some of the video stuff works really well, but yeah, definitely, especially when you're a small team. So for context, we're in the main comms team, but I'm social media manager, and then I've got a direct report, which is social media officer. We are quite a small team within the team. It is helpful though that we are specialists within social media. When you are all comms people trying to manage the platforms together, there's often a little bit of kind of infighting and kind of fighting for space and things like that, which is where a lot of problems can lie. But definitely tailor content. Do you need a license to use viral sounds and mainstream songs? I get asked this all the time, and the genuine answer is I am not the best person on that one. My approach is very much, we're a council, we're a public authority, we're not making any money from the content, we're not promoting anything beyond public interest. I cannot imagine why Craig David, for example, and Universal Music would come for us. I would be very surprised. I also think there are millions of posts going out a day using the same songs. I've never had an issue or know of an authority that has. If there is an issue with TikTok, for example, and I actually had this earlier today, the sound gets muted. That can happen quite a lot, where they'll just mute the video because you haven't proven that you own the song. But I've never had an issue with any licensing stuff. But I am not the best person for that, if I'm honest. Quick one about
approvals. Yeah, approvals before trends pass.
So the key here is, the key with approval is get the trust from leadership over the next few months. And then in that third month, that fourth month, you won't need approval on every single post because you will have earned that trust. That's the key. So I got something out yesterday, or maybe even on Monday, with off the back of Coachella and Justin Bieber. Now, I could just go and do that because I've earned that trust by now. I couldn't have done that a year ago. A year ago, I would have gone, run this by senior leadership or whoever, and they wouldn't get it. So your job is more so educating them to understand that you need to follow trends. They need to understand other authorities are doing it, other places. That helps. And then you should have that trust. In terms of sending every single video for sign off, it's really difficult because you're sending it to people that aren't your target audience. So if it's a video like the potholes one, which is super out there, I mean, I can't imagine a video like that, being understood by the people that are signing it off, even if it's maybe even a comms manager. It's quite a difficult one to understand. So try and build that trust, and then sign off should become a little bit easier. But generally, yeah, I mean, within 3-4 days, that trend's kind of gone, and then you'll look late to the party. So that is a really difficult one. And then just going back to how our team is structured, just to be really clear. So we're quite a big comms team at the moment, but most people are kind of comms manager or generalist comms officers, but they're split into portfolio areas. So there's one that's handled the fly tipping campaign and environment. There's a comms officer for jobs and skills, which might be similar to some of you guys. But that's quite an interesting thing. But then there's me and social media officer. Having that set up as separate is really useful. So we used to let comms officers draft the posts. How I do it now is I draft everything. They give me a little fact sheet of what stuff's about, but I just go and do it because I know the channels and my officer knows the channels, and it just works a little bit better in that way. Using old videos in terms of, it's all like archive stuff, super old. And we don't make any money from it or claim that it's ours. A good way to get around that I see people do is just like, for educational purposes, credit, and then you can credit the place in the caption. Again, never had any issues. The battle of going from traditional post to corporate to doing it my way. So 2.5 years at Ealing, I would honestly say that it took 1.5 years to even get to the point of being able to make anything remotely fun, if I'm honest. It was a seriously painful first year of, oh my Lord, have I seriously signed up for this? But it was worth it because I learned a lot in that year. I saw what other people were doing. I got to know leadership, got their respect, and then started doing it. So that that did take a long time. But I think it should be easier in theory for a lot of you guys, because you can show what I've done, you can show what the NHS might be up to and other places, the Met Police, and that should get a bit of buy-in, because it's like, well, they're doing it, so what's the kind of barrier here for us? Forward planning. Yeah, I'd say we forward plan generally 3 to 4 weeks ahead, but I don't normally make the content until, really, I'm going to be honest, the week of or the week before. Reason being, everything changes so quickly. And so ideally, you want to kind of be making the content as close to when it goes out as possible, especially if you want to follow a trend, or, you know, a certain artist has just become relevant again. You want to use that. That's quite useful. And yeah, reminding senior leadership, that is one thing definitely to take away. They are not your audience. And I have said that to them in a meeting, and there were some really, really funny faces looking back at me. It was worth it. It was definitely worth it. But I did say to them, guys, you're not my target audience. And so if you don't like this content, realistically, I need you to be okay with it. I don't need you to love it. But I need your kids to love it, basically, or your nieces and nephews and things like that. So that's really interesting. And quickly on that one, I am making all the content at the moment in terms of filming. And my officer, I once let a service record video. It turned out really not so great. I would say you're a lot better off doing it yourself, because you'll learn the tips and tricks and you'll get better. And the only way you can get better is by being out there yourself. James, we can go for a couple more. There's so many.
There is a lot. I think the Harshall's just come back to a point I think that a couple of people raised earlier around the kind of measuring perception and perhaps behavior change and stuff like that. And I think I don't know, I feel like there's a kind of two-pronged element to that. I think where content or stories or whatever it is you're using are kind of being used for a purpose to maybe drive behavior or a particular campaign. I think certainly it's obviously kind of using that link to say, yes, okay, look, has the content we've been putting out, has that linked to a certain change in, you know, whatever it is we've been trying to do. But I think from a kind of law building side of things, I think, you know, you talked about it in terms of brand building, we've talked about reputation, world building. I think it's that ongoing law building, you know, sharing people our world. I think that, you know, that if we can try and be authentic with what we're doing and earn trust, you know, I think that is, and it's always a difficult one, isn't it, within organizations, particularly with leadership, like trying to show measure reputation, measure trust, measure brand. You know, it's always a slightly more intangible thing to be able to do. But that, you know, and I think some of the comments, to be fair, that you've been getting of start to show that. But that's kind of the other side to it.
I think what I'd say was, so resident perception, we do have a survey. We've not had one super recently since we've kind of really taken off on social, so I can't comment on whether it's worked or not. But we will have one. Which is interesting. How do I know people from commenting and engaging are from Ealing? There's two ways. So number one is literally with my eyeballs in the comment sections and seeing that's my school, or FYP to local, meaning for you page to local on TikTok. That's how I know. I mean, yeah, you could argue someone's just put that. That would be pretty odd. Generally speaking, it is people from the borough. They're saying things about the borough that only someone from the borough would know. That's my number one indicator, generally speaking. People following the account. Now, we do get a few followers because people just think the content's funny, but a lot of people that are following have just commented, and they're kind of saying, you know, love this account, that's my borough, and then they'll follow. The other way is in the back end of, so we use Sprout Social, in the back, like kind of in the analytics side of that, there's a toggle we can use, and this might be an Orlo or whatever you guys use as well, and you'll basically be able to see where people are from. And it will say, now, annoyingly, it can only really tell you, at least for us, London. It doesn't tell us too much of the specific towns, but just look for that. Look for London or wherever it is you are. That is a really strong indicator that you're reaching the right audience. It's never going to be dead on, but I'd say long as you are mostly reaching your towns or whatever it is, then that's a brilliant indicator that it works. And quickly on how often I report, I am looking every single day because I'm a bit obsessed. But I'd say I report back to SLT every 2 weeks. And then a big monthly one, just to give them kind of a general indicator of how stuff's going. And I like to let the rest of the team know as well, so they know what's going on. But I'd say just constantly be looking and seeing what's working and what's not. That's the key. What works, what doesn't. If it doesn't work, just stop and adapt. That's the key.
Thank you so much, James. I'm aware we've hit the 2 o'clock mark, and thank
Yeah,
you so many people for hanging on. I know sometimes people have to like race off, and I'm sure you've all got jobs to go back to. But thank you so much for hanging on, James. Thanks so much for sharing all of your
pleasure.
insider information, or your law building, your world building, and everything that's
Yeah,
been going on at Ealing. And I highly recommend you go and have a look at the Ealing channels, which is they're just highly entertaining. One that made me spit out a drink earlier this week.
oh yeah,
Your was it your dad's bins, little bin, small bin one.
that is brilliant.
Made
That's
made me
brilliant.
actually spit out my drink earlier this week. So yeah, go and have a look at what they're doing. Yeah, if there's anything else you want to follow up with in terms of questions, I'll be sending out the recording next week, so you'll all get the recording as well. But yeah, any other questions, feel free to get in touch and give us a shout. But thanks everyone for coming along, and yeah, hopefully enjoy your weekend as well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.